Good evening, this is Mr. Mitchell, and we're looking at Prob-Stats for random sampling, random samples. And we're going to look at different sampling methods to see which are preferred. There are different ones that are good, and there's some that are not so good that we should stay away from. Again, collecting data is very important. The way you collect data has to be done properly. If you collect it incorrectly, you will get bad, biased data, which is not what we want. That doesn't do any good to anybody. So, random samples is what we are talking about. So, sampling techniques. We're going to talk about a simple random sample, stratified sampling, systematic sampling, cluster sampling, and convenience sampling. 4 of those are good. 1 of them is not. Random sampling. Drawing names from a hat. Anytime you have to do an SRS, a simple random sample, you always want to think of, is it the same as putting names in a hat and drawing them out with a piece of paper? So I have 15 kids in class, and I have each of the students write their name on a little piece of paper, and I put their name into a hat. Put the piece of paper into a hat, and then mix it up, and then have one person pick. That is drawing names from a hat. That is random sampling. That is the best example to use. There are other things that are random sampling that follow that same idea. But if you're not sure if something's a random sample or a simple random sample, base it on the hat method. Some other things, using a random number table to select a sample, we will work on that. We will practice. I'll show you a random number table, and we'll practice setting it up and using it. And then using a random number generator, that's using some kind of technology, whether it's a computer or a calculator, to randomly select certain people, animals, or whatever you are studying. Some things that are not good. We want to stay away from these. Asking for volunteers to respond to a survey. Yeah, a lot of people can tell you no, they don't want to answer it. Usually the people that answer a voluntary survey sample are the people who are extreme. They are really, really happy or really, really mad. The people in the middle, we don't hear from. So we don't really have an idea of how to compare those. So we have to just be aware of that. The other thing is choosing the first 5 customers to come in a store, or the first 5 students to walk into the room or into the school. That's called a convenience sampling. Those are not good. We want to stay away from them. That's biased data, and it gives us biased results. So we're going to take a simple random sample of size N, size N. Every sample of size N has an equal chance of being selected. So everybody has the same chance to be selected in the sample. It's a biased sample if you are more likely to select a certain group of people, or just some people have a more favorable outcome. Everybody has an equal chance when you put everybody's name into a hat. Every item in the population has equal chance of being included. Stratified sampling is when we break things into a characteristic first. So that could be broken into male, female, or we could break it into grade, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Some common characteristic could be on race or ethnicity or on a sports that we play. We could just do it by sports teams. Whatever we do, it's a common characteristic. We break them into their groups, and then from those groups, then we randomly select people from each group. So you must divide the characteristic, put them into the same groups, and then you'll do a simple random sample basically from each of those groups. Systematic sampling. Population is arranged in a sequential order. You select somewhere to start, and then you select every so many person. So if we were arranging students from an alphabetical order, you put the first person first and range them all from A to Z, and then you randomly decide where you're going to start with a random number table or random generator. And then you decide, well, I'm going to pick every 3rd person or every 5th person. That's systematic sampling. Problem with that is, it's a good method, but you have to get everybody arranged in an order. And sometimes that's not realistic. So that's a problem with systematic. But it is a good sampling method. Cluster sampling method happens a lot. Population is divided into sections. Could be different sections of Carlisle. We could do the different townships in the borough, and then sample different people randomly from each area. So we would randomly select 100 people from each township in the borough, and then we would get an idea of what each area is thinking. You could do it with counties or with states. That's another way you could do it. But it's a simple random sample once you have put them into a cluster. Convenience sampling, we're going to use whatever data we have. It's not a good method. We want to stay away from it. You can have a lot of severe bias because it was convenient. Like I said, if you do it with the first students coming into the school, that's usually the same certain students, and they might have a certain opinion, or the same people that walk in at a certain time of day into a restaurant. You're going to have different people walking in at 7 o'clock in the morning versus 7 o'clock at night. So if you are conveniently just staying there at one time, you're going to get biased data that way. So you want to stay away from that. Simulation is when we use a simulation. It's hard to define it without using the word. We're going to pretend that we did an experiment or a sample. We know what should happen, and we're going to simulate that. And sometimes you get a little different results based on what are some of the restrictions or some of the requirements of it. You may use a random number table, or you can use a calculator or computer to do that. Sampling with replacement is when it's like when you do names in a hat. If I pull your name out, sometimes a name doesn't go back in. But sampling with replacement is when I put your name back in the hat, and you can win again. So it's not removed. So you could win twice. Well, I guess I didn't hide the answers, so I need to do that. Bear with me here. So you already saw the answer for this one, but I fixed it for the other ones. Which sampling technique is described? College students are waiting in line for registration. Every 8th person in line is surveyed. Well, remember I said, how are you going to get college students to wait in line for registration? Well, I guess they have to, but are you going to get them in a nice line, or is it going to be kind of a wavy, curvy line? So it might be harder to do that. So that is known as systematic sampling, as you probably already saw before. Okay? It's a systematic. It's a good method. If you can get them in line, it works. If you can't get them in line, well, then you got to do something else. So then that's not even an option. So just be aware of that. Which sampling technique is described? College students are waiting in line for registration. Students are asked to volunteer to respond to a survey. Okay, so they're waiting in line. Students are asked to volunteer to respond. So what do we think that is? I'll pause. Well, that's known as convenience sampling. You're asking volunteers, you're not... You might say, well, how do you force somebody? Well, when you ask somebody, they give them the opportunity to say no. If they're in line and they're registering, you just go over and ask them and don't give them an opportunity to... But notice, there's no random selection process here. So you're only going to take the people that volunteer. So that's why it's convenience sampling. It's not a good method. Shoot. Guess you saw the answer there. So in a large high school, students from every homeroom are randomly selected to participate in a survey. So what's that? So they are in a homeroom. Could that be considered a cluster, or could that be considered stratified? It's not a simple random sample. Well, I know you saw the answer, but they have a common characteristic. They have the same last names. So that's their common characteristic, so that's why it's stratified. Stratified random sample because they have a common characteristic. You might say, well, they're in the same location. Yeah, they're only in that location, though, because of their last name. The location doesn't really define what they are, though, or who they are, or anything like that. An accountant uses a random number generator to select 10 accounts for audit. Well, hopefully, you're not one of the people being audited. Nobody likes to be audited by the IRS. But what kind of sampling technique is this? Was there any broken down by characteristics? Are they asking for volunteers? No, this is just a simple random sample. It's just like getting your name drawn out of a hat. They put so many names or numbers in a hat, and then they draw them. That's a simple random sample. Okay. Determine students' opinions of a new registration method to college recruiter called all the students in the 717 area code that were enrolled in their college. So 717 area code, that's a location, right? Because there's other area codes. 814 is to the west of us in State College and up in Erie. And then there's 703, that's a Virginia number. And then there's 301, that's Maryland, right? So there's different areas that's known as cluster sampling. It's locations. And that's it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You'll have some problems to work on and some things to look at to make sure you understand sampling methods.